Hey guys, Sean here and welcome to the F1 Word. Now by the time the 2020 Formula 1 season finally gets underway, it will have been 7 months since we last saw a Grand Prix and 5 months since February, where we of course had car launches and testing. So, seeing as it has been quite a while, here's a recap of some of the headlines from car launches through testing, silly season and right up to the release of the new calendar. Starting with those launches then, and Haas were the first team to give us a glimpse of the 2020 season as they revealed their new livery online on the 6th of February. That was followed by Mercedes on the Monday, who showed off their new look, which was more or less the same as the livery they'd run over the last few years, but with, as I just checked my Dulux colour chart, a flash of rhubarb red, although in the studio shots it's more of a raspberry red to be fair, but I'd have said maroon overall, but never mind. All that matters is it's there to show off their new sponsor Ineos, and it was displayed on last year's W10, or as some might say this year's Racing Point, and not the W11. The first proper launch of 2020 came from Ferrari as they pulled the covers off their 2020 Challenger at a very fancy launch, and I still maintain it was nice to see some teams put some actual effort into their launches rather than just posting a digital render on social media. Let's be honest, it was very cheesy though, but I love that kind of thing, so that's fine by me. Next up, it was the turn of Red Bull and Renault. No fancy piano music here or flashing lights. In fact, the Renault launch was literally just a season launch as they showed us nothing more than a few close-up studio renders of their car during a press event in Paris. As for Red Bull, a little bit more effort. They unveiled the RB16 at Silverstone with Max Verstappen taking to the track for its initial shakedown. And the Dutchman said at the time he was itching to get back racing. Just imagine how he and the others must be feeling right now. It's been a long old wait. McLaren once again launched their new car at the McLaren Technology Centre on February 13th, so no McLarentine's Day for them this year. But they showed off a tweak to their 2019 livery, and I have to say, the more I've seen of that car in all the B-roll I keep using, the more I've really grown to love that matte finish. I wasn't overly keen at first. The following day, Mercedes took to the track at Silverstone in the W11, of course our first proper look at the new livery on the new car. And as is the case with more or less every team, renders were also released online. But as great as it was to see the new Mercedes on track, I think it's fair to say at the time the launch everybody seemed really hyped for was the unveiling of the brand new AlphaTauri, and that was the launch that rounded off the week. It took place at Hangar 7 in Salzburg and was probably the most spectacular and glitzy launch. In fact, it was really more of a fashion show with the unveiling of the car in several stages. But weirdly enough, I actually quite enjoyed it. Very over the top, and it was very Red Bull as well. A bit cheesy like the Ferrari one, but I like stuff like that, as I've already said. Now this might seem a bit random, and unfortunately I don't have a clip of this, but my two highlights from that entire AlphaTauri launch were Franz Tost talking about fashion, and then the brilliantly awkward moment where he tried to get his photo taken by the press while sitting on the rotating floor the car was actually sat on. I don't know why that sticks in my mind, but it still makes me chuckle now. Absolutely brilliant. But anyway, that was it for the first week of launches, but things weren't quite as spectacular the following week. Racing Point revealed their 2020 livery, but not their car, and that was during an event in Austria, and Williams showed off their new car with a video on their social media channels. Of course, that livery that we see there on the Williams will be changing before Austria. If you're not sure why, that will crop up a little bit later in the video. As for Alfa Romeo, we got our first look at their car at a shakedown, but they officially unveiled it in the pit lane and online just before the start of pre-season testing. And having kicked off the launches with a look at their livery all the way back on February 6th, Haas also took the covers off their 2020 car in the pit lane before the first test. And we got our first look at the new Racing Point when it took to the track in Barcelona. That is, the launch is out of the way then, but what about testing? Well, the first test took place across the 19th, 20th and 21st of February, with the second test being run across the 26th, 27th and 28th. Of course, just 6 days of testing this year. And as usual, it gave us plenty to talk about and to speculate on. Initially, all the talk was about the new Racing Point and its glaring similarities to the 2019 Mercedes, which led to the team being nicknamed Tracing Point. And in fairness to them, they were very open about the fact that they had copied the W10 and were adamant that no information had changed hands between them and the Silver Arrows. It really was just a direct copy. Attention soon shifted though, as people began to notice some strange movements on the Mercedes steering wheel. I'm sure you'll remember this. Now on the straights, both Lewis Hamilton and Valtteri Bottas could be seen pulling back on the steering wheel and then pushing it back into place when they reached a corner or the braking zone for a corner. it was later revealed that it was a new dual-axis steering system, or DAS for short, and it was designed to adjust the toe angle of the front wheels whilst the car was out on track. Now that, of course, led to questions about its legality and threats of protest from their rivals, but it was later deemed legal by the FIA for 2020. Other talking points from the 6 days of testing included an apparent lack of reliability from the Mercedes power unit, not something we're used to seeing, of course. Ferrari appearing to struggle and them being quite open about their concerns. Red Bull's solid pace that might just see them challenge Mercedes this season, and what looks like a very tight midfield once again. And just as a reminder, here's a look at the overall combined fastest times from both tests. Valtteri Bottas during Test 1 set the fastest time across both of them, 1:15.7 on the C5 tyre. Max Verstappen on the C4 tyre was half a second slower than Bottas and in second place, with Daniel Ricciardo on the C5s on a 1:16.2 in third. I'll say it right now before you pop in the comments and say it. We can't read anything into these testing times at the best of times, but certainly not for 2020 given that these were set, 5 months ago. So they're even more irrelevant than ever. But Leclerc there in 4th, Hamilton 5th and Ocon in 6th place. But for what it's worth, 7 tenths between Bottas and Ocon, that's not bad at all for Renault, potentially. Stop it, Sean, you can't read anything into these. Perez there with the 7th fastest time, ahead of Sainz, Vettel, Russell and Kvyat. You've got Kubica there, it was great to see him on track in Barcelona. Of course, in an Alfa Romeo this year, C5 compound 1:16.9 during the second test. Rogro, he's in there, C4 1:17.0, then it's Gasly, Raikkonen, Stroll on the C3 tyre on a 1:17.1. And then, for what it's worth, Latifi, Giovinazzi, Magnussen and Albon. But Norris there, a 1:17.5, 4 tenths slower than Stroll in the Racing Point on the same day of testing and on the same compound of tyre. Could Racing Point be a dark horse this season? Let's move on from this though. There we have it then. The 2020 season was all ready to go. It looks so good. It looks so exciting. We were all pumped for a brand new season. However, a hell of a lot happened between the final test and the original season opener in Australia just 2 weeks later. COVID-19 continued its spread across the world and that left Formula One in a very difficult position. Do they race or do they call it off altogether? The Chinese Grand Prix had already been postponed and there was a weird feeling around the sport as everyone arrived at Albert Park. It was weird for some of the journalists there by all accounts. And I seem to recall there was a strange air around it all as a fan as well. It just didn't feel quite right. Ultimately, the decision was taken for F1 after McLaren chose to withdraw from the event after one of their team tested positive for the virus. That led to meeting after meeting that ran pretty much literally all night. And despite it initially looking as though the event would go ahead because enough teams had agreed to race, parent companies apparently began to step in and in the end, just before the start of FP1, the race weekend was postponed. That was soon followed by the races in Bahrain, Vietnam, the Netherlands, Spain, Azerbaijan, Canada, France, and for the first time in the sport's history, the Monaco Grand Prix, all being postponed and in some cases, again, Monaco cancelled altogether. With so many races called off, though, focus switched to what the sport could do to protect its future, with this year's cars being frozen and it being agreed by all the teams that they will be using this year's chassis again next year. And the huge new rule changes that were due to come into force in 2021 have been pushed back now to 2022. However, after much deliberation, the cost cap will still be implemented next season, but at a reduced level of $145 million initially, and that will fall further over the next few seasons. Despite all the measures put in place, though, teams are still definitely feeling the pinch, with Williams, as touched on earlier, giving up their rocket sponsorship, and even considering selling part or all of its F1 team, and McLaren are also looking for investors. Despite Formula One being on a prolonged hiatus though, the teams didn't exactly all put their feet up and relax. The teams pulled together to help in the fight against COVID-19 with initiatives seen up and down the paddock, and Project Pit Lane was also kick-started with the 7 UK-based teams pooling their resources to help develop much-needed medical devices including ventilators. And whether it was Project Pit Lane or the efforts put in by other teams, including, of course, Ferrari unveiling a new ventilator design as part of a collaboration with the Italian Institute of Technology, I can honestly say I was so very proud of the sport and the teams for what they were doing to help those most in need. I just really hope that doesn't get forgotten. The factories did eventually shut down to F1 related work though, as the teams agreed to effectively take the summer break over the spring ahead of what was likely to be a very busy second half of the season, but that didn't mean the news stopped coming. Enter silly season. It was announced in May that Sebastian Vettel would be leaving Ferrari at the end of 2020, and that led to speculation for about a day over which driver would replace him. And it was revealed just 2 days later that Carlos Sainz would be teaming up with Charles Leclerc at the Scuderia for 2021, and that Daniel Ricciardo would be leaving Renault to take the Spaniard's seat at McLaren. Of course, there are still lots of drivers out of contract at the end of this year, so the driver market was set to be fascinating anyway. Now, though, it's going to be really interesting to see just where everybody lands and what Sebastian Vettel chooses to do about his future. Will he go into the midfield or will he take a sabbatical? And then about 2.5 weeks later, Formula One finally unveiled the first part of their new 2020 calendar with 8 races taking place in Europe across July, August and September. But more on that in the season preview later this week. So there we have it then. Despite the fact there has been no racing whatsoever, there has still been plenty going on in Formula One to keep us talking. But now, deep breath, it's time to look ahead to the new season, and in just 10 days' time, we will finally be able to talk about some on-track action. I don't think I have ever been this excited about watching FP1. That is it for this video and recap though. I will be back later this week, as I say, with a preview of the 2020 season, or at least an all you need to know style video. In the meantime though, don't forget that you can of course follow me over on social media, and all of the links you need for that are in the description down below. But as ever, thank you for watching, and hopefully I will catch you again in the next one. Bye bye.